Congressman Estes, we always enjoy having the opportunity to have a conversation with you. You are one of my favorite members of Congress, and we have a great delegation in Kansas, but you're always so willing to have a conversation with Kansans and with us to talk about what's really going on in DC, and that is incredibly important for people to know. A lot of things get lost in the media and the messaging, and having the opportunity to hear right from our members and have you guys be accessible is significant. So thank you, Congressman Estes, for being here today.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate the opportunity to get out and just talk about what's going on. I mean, that's so important that people, because we are a representative democracy, that we need to have the opportunity for people to understand what's going on and share information back and forth.
Yes, we appreciate that. One of the big things that's been in the news, obviously, is the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which as a lot of us know or feel, it very much does not do that, and in fact takes us in the wrong direction as far as inflation goes. But just wanted to know if you could talk to us a little bit about that piece of policy and what some of the concerns you have, and then let's follow it up and talk about what can we do. So.
Yeah, the Democrats really are so good at coming up with good propaganda names. I mean, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Actually, the Congressional Budget Office said it increases inflation in the short term and has a negligible effect over 10 years, which is the scorecard kind of that we look at in terms of that. And, you know, it really does. It doubles down on the problems that started last year with President Biden's first 100-day victory of the ARPA and basically starting to spend more money. And what we've seen instantly since then is just inflation's taken off. And so this so-called Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, waste money on a lot of things. For example, they're hiring 87,000 more IRS agents.
Wow.
So there's 90,000 now. So thinking about that it's basically going to be the size of the U.S. Marine Corps if they hired all of those.
Wow.
And it put restrictions. Only 4% of that $80 billion that's in that is going to go towards customer service. So when the phones are only answered 18% of the time now, when people can't get their tax returns completed, when their security at the IRS is so lax that they've allowed 120,000 people's confidential information to get out into public, they're still not putting the money into that. Right. And instead they're looking at how do they politicize this effort. And they say they're not going to increase audits. I mean, that's part of their stick is they're not going to increase audits on middle class folks, but they're basically put the requirement in place that they go through with audits the same way they do now.
Right.
And they'd have to increase audits on people making more than $400,000 by more than 30 times the current rate in order to raise as much money as they say they're going to raise, and decline the number of people that they do audits on the middle class. And it's false advertisement is really what it is. And unfortunately, the American people are going to suffer through it. I mean, we've already seen the IRS be used as a political pawn in the past, particularly when the last time that now President Biden was Vice President Biden and the Obama administration, politicizing the people that had different political views or different businesses, different parties. And so it's really a sad way to run the country, is using the IRS as a political tool.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we are not putting the government in a position that we are eroding free speech, and that is of great concern. One of the other bills that has come up recently, and we might drill back into the Inflation Reduction Act in a minute, but another great name for a bill that doesn't do what it says is the American Rescue Plan. Can you talk to us a little bit about your perspective on that piece of legislation and what we should be concerned about most?
Yeah, it really, that's kind of, the last several presidential elections we've had, what's the 100-day victory for a new president coming in? And this was President Biden's signature piece of legislation in the first 100 days. And again, false advertisement, the American Rescue Plan. In reality, It was a $1.9 trillion spending. They used COVID as an excuse to fund all of this.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, we actually had the vaccine that was rolling out. People were getting better. The health outcomes were improving. It wasn't needed at all.
Right.
And instead, what we saw starting from last March when it was passed, we've seen inflation take off.
Yeah.
And we're now at the point where we're at 40 years highs. I mean, the last 4 months have been at 40-year records of inflation. And I mean, it's hitting so many Americans in terms of what it costs at the grocery store, what it costs at the gas pump, what it's costing in the housing and rent going up. And now what the Federal Reserve, who were too late at the table to start raising interest rates to keep inflation from spiraling out of control. Now we're seeing interest rates going up, and it's leading into a recession. We're seeing that slowdown that's going to hit people. And so not only are we is the Democrats' plan hitting people in their pocketbooks, but it's going to cost them their job in layoffs as we go through into this recession. So it's very unfortunate that they really don't get it. And so many of my colleagues still don't get it. They think that, well, the solution to that's go spend more money.
Right.
And in reality, that's what caused the problem.
Right, right. When we're looking at the federal government's budget and the spending, we've been saying that for years and years, that the spending is out of control on the federal level. Do you think there's an opportunity for us to retake back the appropriations process, maybe do that a little differently? Or what are some good ways that we can reassess the federal budget so that we can finally make some progress from that fiscal standpoint?
Yeah, it really is unfortunate. I mean, on any given year, I and my colleagues on both the House and the Senate, we vote on roughly 30% of what gets spent at the federal level.
Wow.
And the rest of it happens automatically.
Right.
I mean, granted, things like Social Security and Medicare are set up, people pay into, but they don't pay enough in for what the typical person draws
Sure,
out.
sure.
But then all the other so-called entitlements, which are really just social welfare programs, it's the Medicaid, it's the food stamp food stamp program. It's all of these programs that people just automatically happen, and we don't get a vote on it. And at the same time, you know, we're not following the traditional regular order that you think of when you think about the government process. You know, we all learned in our civics classes that, you know, how do you pass a bill? It goes to the committee and it gets debated in one chamber, gets voted on the floor, some amendments get brought up in that process, goes to the other chamber, maybe it gets amended as well, gets voted on, and then once a bill that's agreed to between the two chambers goes to the president's desk and the president signs it and it becomes law. In reality, we're not doing that. We're not running bills through the committee process. We're not following regular order so we can have that debate. It's been a long time that process has starting to break down, but we've really seen it terrible the last 2 years under majority Democrat rule in both the House and the Senate and the White House. And so basically we're not doing the job of the American people because we can't express their views, express their wishes. We can't be representatives of them. Net result is, I mean, we're spending out of control because of the special interests that are driving that.
Yeah. And another piece to that puzzle, you said a few things that I think also relates to the regulatory process as well. And you talk about things that are driving up costs or, you know, the red tape that is hurting our economy and the supply chain, but costs for consumers, costs for businesses, and being driven honestly by special interests where you guys maybe could have perhaps more of a say with that. Talk to me about the regulatory process and what can we do better on the red tape?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's a big impact on individuals and on businesses in terms of having taxes.
Yep.
But almost as big an impact, if not more, is the regulatory burden that gets placed on individuals, on business community, and over the years, the executive branch has become much more powerful than it was ever intended to be by founding fathers.
Sure.
You know, we do have 3 branches of government, and the intention was that there would be some checks and balances through that, but they weren't necessarily designed to be 3 equal branches of government. I mean, the legislative branch was supposed to be the most important.
Sure.
And focus on what's the will of the people and what's important from a state standpoint, what's important from the individuals that live across the country. And we saw it during the Trump administration when they went out and attacked the regulatory burden, and we saw how the economy took off.
Yeah.
Between the rework that we did on the taxes, on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and cutting the number of regulations that actually came through with the Trump administration, we saw a lot of things that just juiced the economy and made it work. And so we had more jobs going, we had growing wages. I mean, that was the first time we had wage growth in decades for the American people. And you didn't have all this inflation that you're having now under the Biden administration.
Right, right. These are all such key things. We can change the policy. I think one thing that we wanted to highlight is that it doesn't have to be this way. I know you and some of your colleagues have a better vision for what Congress could do and how the federal government could be operating. So in your view, what are you working on? What are some things that you have going on that takes us maybe in a different direction than where it's going right now?
Yeah, the Republican conference is rolling out the Commitment to America, where we're really focusing on, let's get back to how do we grow the economy? How do we make sure that we make America secure and safe, whether it's border security, whether it's crime, whether it's making sure that we focus on what are the priorities that we should be spending money on. And part of that gets back into, we need to be following regular order, and we need to be following the process that was intended, that we have debate in the chamber, we have debates in committees, and the bills get brought to the floor so that we can debate and work through those process and move forward. So that's a big piece that we're looking at, and I expect Republicans to be in the majority next conference. I mean, that's kind of the expected standard now. I firmly believe it'll happen just because the American people are seeing the bad policies that are coming out of the Biden administration and the Democrat majorities in the legislative branch. And so the piece that we've got to start working on is how do we get back to regular order? How do we focus on our national debt? For example, that's a huge thing right now.
Yeah.
All of this spending and these tax and spending programs have just ballooned the national debt, even more so than it was. I mean, we already were spending more than we were bringing in tax receipts. And there really hasn't been much discussion at all about what do we need to do there. And so it's a process now. There's some Republican members and a few Democrats as well. We're trying to have some dialogue about how do we work through and come up with a plan that addresses the deficit and therefore allows us to get a handle on the debt. Because we're getting to the point where the debt is growing so large that I think the projections are in 3 years, interest payments will be more than what we spend on the defense of the country and through the military.
Wow.
And I mean, that's a horrible way to run the greatest country on earth.
No, you're absolutely right. I think at the last estimate I saw, and I could be wrong, but I think the latest breakdown, and I shouldn't do this off the cuff, but I think it was almost $250,000 per American, how it breaks down as far as the debt responsibility goes for each individual.
Yeah, and it's tough to keep up with those numbers because they're growing so big.
And every minute,
And you look at it as, in one case you may look at it as an individual, other case you may look at it as a family of four.
Right.
Because in reality, that's the impact too, is how does it hurt our families? And whether you're trying to put food on the table or buying new clothes to go back to school or put gas in the car so you can drive to work to afford everything else. And it's continuing to grow both on per person as per taxpayer as well as on the family basis as well.
It's absolutely true. I even see moms where I live in Topeka, and it is clearly hurting everyday Kansans in all aspects. Yeah. And it's just, we can do better, and we do have a better vision for how we can govern better and take this country in a much better direction going forward.
It really is, and at the core, we've got to get back to what the Founding Fathers intended. I mean, their whole goal was they didn't want a big, powerful government. I mean,
Right.
that was the intention. They were escaping from that.
Right.
And instead, what we're seeing now is under the Democrats, and their vision is to have a big government. Their vision is to have the government control so many things, whether it's what you can choose as an individual, what your businesses can operate, how they can, who gets money borrowed from a bank and to open up a business. And, it's actually becoming the kind of business that our forefathers ran from
Right.
in order to start America.
Right. As we believe, at their core, individuals and people are the best ones to make decisions for them and their families, not the government.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the individual freedoms, individual opportunities, and having the government out of the way.
Right.
And, the key part of the government should be, the federal government should be to defense of the country. And we should focus on that and not have a giveaway program for everything that's out there, and not necessarily focus on spending so much for so many people, because anytime you do that, that means you're taking money from one person to give it to somebody else.
Right, right. No, you're absolutely right. Well, I know we don't have a ton of time here, and I want to make sure that we talk about things that you're working on, or what is the last message that you want to give to Kansas that you're talking to today that you want to make sure that they know about?
Yeah, I think the key thing to look at and think about as we go forward into the next Congress, after we get past through the election cycle, one is we've got to focus on the debt. I mean,
Yep.
we've got to put our heads down and figure out how do we address that. And unfortunately, it's easy. It's like people that pay off one credit card with another. Is until you hit the wall and nobody gives you another credit card, you don't know that struggle. So we've got to capture that and solve that problem before we get underwater and figure out how we do that. In terms of how do we take the country forward, there are things that we need to do. We need to focus on how do we keep the economy going? How do we make sure that working Americans can have good jobs, make good wages, and support their family? And we've got to look at the dangers in the world. I mean, it's a dangerous place, and there are people that really want to do evil, and that's why it's so important. You think about defense of the country. Think about what's China going to do next? What's North Korea going to do next? I mean, we're already seeing it with Russia and the invasion that Putin set up of Ukraine, and the impact on the world economy through that. And so we've got to make sure that we have a strong America going forward, so that we can help make sure that American citizens are supported, but also be a leader in the world.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, we really appreciate all your time to talk to us, and the vision that you have for the upcoming Congress, and we are hopeful that it is one that we can get a better trajectory for the future of our country. So.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate the time to talk, and it's so important to talk about what do we do, how do we take our country forward.
Yep, I appreciate that. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.